Ready to begin?
Okay, we'll go.
Let's open the meeting. So we're going to do roll call first?
You have to open the meeting.
Yes, we're opening the meeting.
It's the planning board meeting of January 28th,
It's November.
right?
It's okay. It's November 28th.
November 28th, January. I'm in the wrong year. Okay. Set roll call. Mr. Amico. Present. Mr. Del Vecchio. Present. Mr. Desimone. Yeah. Mr. Jaramello. Present. Mrs. Simmons Hurling.
Here.
Okay. Excuse me. First order of business is a public hearing to address a zoning ordinance amendment for the creation of a smart growth overlay district for the Shirley Avenue area in Green Street area, formerly known as the Trailer Park.
Let's hear from the proponents.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Tom Skrowski, Chief of Planning and Community Development. I'm excited to talk to you today about our zoning amendment proposal. Just for a quick background check, because I've presented a few times in front of the City Council. Thumbs up, thumbs down if you saw it before, or if this is going to be the first time. I won't be offended if you didn't see me on Revere TV. I just want to make sure I'm giving everybody the full amount of information and not recapping for in the event that all of you already saw it. But I'll try to cover the most important points that I mentioned at the last public hearing and an informal meeting at the City Council prior to that, and also discuss how this ties in with MBTA zoning reforms, otherwise known as 40A3A. And then we'll get into the two districts, one in Shirley Avenue, one in Green Street, what a lot of folks know as the Lee Trailer Park area, roughly. And then talk about frequently asked questions we've heard in the community, and then get into next steps of where this amendment is heading. So for starters, just to talk a little bit about 40R and the proposal in front of you, it is a local zoning ordinance that is taking advantage of a state statute called 40R. It was established in 2004 by state statute, and it was intended to create districts that encourage housing near public transportation options with zoning bonuses to property owners who build in 40R districts and state financial incentives to cities that adopt districts. And ultimately, the district would be an overlay, meaning the existing zoning would remain in place. So in the case of the Lee Trailer Park neighborhood, the underline is the TED district. And in the case of Shirley Avenue, it's mostly the general business district, as well as a few others, which we'll get to in a few. But it will still be an overlay. The underlying existing zoning will remain in place. And to be eligible for this overlay, a project has to have at least 20% deed restricted affordable units or be below a certain size threshold that's determined by the council and the planning board. The size threshold is currently set at 8, what's proposed in the amendment, which means that anything 9 units or greater would have a requirement to include 20% affordable. We could go no higher than 12 and no lower than 0. But that is the range that could be determined by the planning board and the city council. And although it's a local zoning district, it's a state model ordinance, so it does require state approvals before the city can adopt it, which it's undergoing those approvals in tandem track here. The connection with 3A, what a lot of folks know is MBTA communities require cities to adopt zoning to allow multifamily housing development by right. And by right basically means it can be built without a variance or without a special permit. And currently we are not in compliance with 3A. Our zoning must allow for 6,135 units by right according to state rules. That doesn't mean that 6,135 units need to be built. It's just basically the state takes an analysis of our existing zoning. They run a calculation through a model to see would our zoning hypothetically allow for that amount of units. And according to their model, our current zoning allows for about 4,086 units. And these 40R districts will bring us into compliance. And we must comply as a rapid transit community by December 31st, 2023, so at the end of this year. And if we're not in compliance, we'll lose eligibility for a variety of state grant programs. Here's just a few of them, and just 5-year total in the city of Revere. These different grant programs, we've received about $20 million from those 5 or from these various programs over 5 years. So there's some pretty significant grant funding that we would stand to lose by not being in compliance. The three that are highlighted in red are the ones that the original statute called out specifically as those grants that would be taken away if we were not compliant. The ones in black were those that were determined after the fact by the Healy-Driscoll administration as additional items that they would take under consideration to not extend funding offers to non-compliant communities. The biggest ones, though, the Local Capital Projects Fund, which is a fund that housing authorities use, basically the main source they use to update and maintain their properties. MassWorks funding is what we use to do a lot of big infrastructure projects. So we just received a $5 million project to conduct, along with HYM, a lot of the offsite mitigation improvements for Suffolk Downs, just as one example, but that's a pretty sizable grant program that we use heavily for a lot of traffic mitigation programs throughout the city. And then Housing Choices, a new grant program that we just became eligible for, and the $285,000 in this case is going towards a series of improvements in the Shirley Avenue neighborhood and a participatory budgeting process that we started up there. But all told, some pretty significant grant funding that we would stand to lose if we were not in compliance with 3A. And just a few kind of reminders, by right doesn't mean automatic approval. State and local rules still apply. For example, building and fire code, any by right approval would still go in front of site plan review. There's utility, drainage requirements, traffic, floodplain mitigation. In certain cases, they need to work through MEPA. So it doesn't mean it's an automatic approval. There's still a lot of layers of approval to work through. But, enough about 3A. Let's get into the districts themselves and why we chose 40R to become 3A compliant. So 3 main reasons we wanted to do this. The first of all, we knew we had to zone for additional housing. We wanted to choose smart growth. We wanted to encourage compact growth near transit, which is what the 40A statute allows for. And Shirley Avenue is one of the most densely populated districts in the city. The Green Street neighborhood's a half mile from Beachmont Station, and it's on underutilized land. So the idea behind this district is we're requiring less parking, closer to transit, so hopefully then less cars on our roadway. And I think you see that in a lot of the developments in Shirley Avenue that have been approved without significant parking. You disincentivize bringing additional cars on the roadway. So that's kind of the thought process there, and hopefully that's what we'd like to see with this ordinance. We know traffic's the main concern that a lot of folks have connected with development. It also encourages affordability. We are required to have 10% of our housing stock to be considered affordable. We're currently at 7.2%, and we're dropping with every new development that's primarily market rate. 40R developments are required to have 20% affordable. And just to note, kind of going back to our master plan, Next Stop Revere called for creating an affordable housing protection overlay in the Shirley Avenue district. This isn't a protection overlay. It's more carrot than stick. It's an option, but it's the best effort we have to actively and deliberately encourage affordability in the neighborhood. And then similarly with the Lee Trailer Park, when those 100 units were removed, they weren't affordable housing in the traditional sense. They weren't deed restricted, but they're what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, right? It was housing for working people. So I think we also look at that as an opportunity to see how we could replace that existing housing stock with some new high-quality affordable units. And then there are some financial benefits too. That's the third and final reason. We receive a zoning incentive payment of up to $600,000 when the district's approved, and then we would receive a density bonus payment of $3,000 per bonus unit of housing that's allowed above and beyond the existing zoning. So this, in effect, would act as a replacement to CIT, which, if a project currently receives a special permit or if it receives a variance, there's a payment that's received above and beyond what would be allowed under zoning. That payment comes from the developer today, but in the case of any project with 40R, that payment would come actually from the state. But our intent would be for that to act similar to CIT to help fund local projects in the neighborhood that's impacted by housing development. And now to go into the 2 districts specifically, this is a Shirley Avenue district, which is largely the general business district of Shirley Avenue, as well as this small slice here that's Wonderland Marketplace. It's actually pretty large slice, sizable parcel of land. The original proposal that I brought to the City Council a few weeks ago included 2 districts that are highlighted here in red that are actually RB. And after further consultation with the ward councilor, Ira Novoselsky, suggested we remove those parcels from this map. And I would strongly recommend that if you were to make an affirmative recommendation for this district, that we remove those 2 areas from the map. They're residential zones, strictly, as opposed to the others that are commercial and maybe more accommodating for multifamily development. In terms of the uses that this district would allow, everything is listed here, both residential and commercial, and everything that's highlighted in blue is already what's allowed in the ordinance today with the underlying zoning. So in short, what this overlay would allow for is the exact type of uses that the underlying GB district already allows for. The main change comes in dimensional requirements. So in this district, the maximum building height would go from 50 feet to 60 feet. Setbacks would go back slightly from 20 feet to 15. And the minimum lot size would go from 10,000 square feet to 5,000. And then the floor area ratio from 1.5 to 2. And just for a quick primer for anyone on TV who wants to understand what floor area ratio is all about, that's what FAR stands for. And basically, a floor area ratio is a measurement that takes a look at what the existing lot size of a property is and what development could occur there. So an FAR of 1.5 would allow for a 7,500 square foot development, basically taking the existing lot size in this example of 5,000 square feet, multiplying it by 1.5. So if we were to increase the FAR from 1.5 to 2, that would then allow for 10,000 square feet of total development. I'm sure the members of the planning board are well aware, but just wanted to level set for anyone else who needed to understand that concept. And then parking requirements would also be adjusted slightly from the underlying zoning, which allows for 1.5 for a 1-bedroom, 1.75 for 2, and 2 for 3 and above. This would just go down from that to 1 for 1 bedroom, 1.5, and 1.75 respectively. There are no commercial parking requirements in the GB district today, so that would carry forward in this overlay district. And then in the Green Street district, what you see outlined here in that orange is basically the district, which covers the bulk of the Lee Trailer Park area, but going right up to the roadway. I will note for the record that at the last public hearing, we had an attorney and a few of the property owners that own property on, I guess, the northwest side of Green Street that wanted to be added to the district. And they made their comments known in the public hearing. I will say the ward councilor did not state their support of this. I'm not really sure where they stand quite yet, so I can't offer as definitive of a recommendation as I can with the other district that has the ward councilor's full endorsement. Just wanted to state that for the record, not that should influence your opinion one way or another, but it's worth noting. And then in terms of what uses are allowed there today in the underlying district, residential uses actually aren't allowed in the TED district by right today. It's allowed by special permit through a PUD. But here's just a sampling of the uses that are allowed by right and by special permit. Generally commercial industrial uses. And then the commercial uses that this district would allow includes a few of them that are already allowed by right. Those are the ones highlighted in blue. And generally are commercial uses that would be compatible with a residential development. So the primary goal here would be to permit a residential development that might have a mixed-use component. And any commercial uses on the site would have to be less than 51% of the total development. So you couldn't have an overlay with 80% commercial, 20% residential. It has to be primarily a residential development. And then in terms of dimensional requirements, it's roughly the same as the Shirley Avenue district, although the minimum lot area is 10,000 square feet. The floor area ratio stays at 1.5, but otherwise it's roughly the same. There's no great comparison for the dimensional requirements for the underlying zoning because that is for commercial industrial development. The way a residential project would get permitted would be a PUD through the planning board. So as such, they have a pretty wide latitude to grant dimensional waivers, variances. They don't have as strict of a set of criteria to adhere to. But if we saw development taking place through this 40R, it would have to follow what we see here. And then in terms of parking, it's actually more in line with what the GB district is today in terms of residential uses, 1.5 for a 1-bedroom, 1.75 for a 2-bedroom, and 2 for a 3 and over that. And the rationale there being it's not as close as Shirley Avenue is to the T. So, there's an expectation that vehicles will be needed, maybe not as much as, neighborhoods further away from the T. But we wanted to respect the distance and difference between the two districts there. And then the other commercial uses that we allowed for in the district as proposed, they just align with the existing parking requirements for that commercial use in our zoning. And then just a quick glance at the planned unit development that's actually proposed at this location that will be going in front of the City Council probably in 2024 as a planned unit development. You can see a rendering of it. This proposed development is a 237 unit development, about 100,000 square feet of lot size. You got the setbacks here, 7 stories, an FAR of 2.6, and 0.75 parking spaces per unit, and currently they're proposing it at 0% affordability, so they have no affordable units within it. So I just wanted to put a fine point on this because I think a lot of people have heard about this potential development. This development wouldn't meet, it would be too high, the FAR would be too high, it wouldn't have enough parking, and it wouldn't have any affordability. So this actually would not comply with this ordinance. So they could still choose to utilize the underlying zoning, seek a planned unit development through the City Council, but if they wanted to use this overlay, they couldn't because they don't qualify under that criteria. Just for a sense of what would qualify, would be a development about half the scale. Although the stories limit is about 6 once you take FAR into account, realistically we'd be looking at maybe a 4-story building, an FAR 1.5, and parking 224 spaces roughly, which is kind of like the average of the parking requirement. So again, what is being proposed by the developer wouldn't be allowed unless they wanted to have a scaled back version with more parking, with affordability brought into the mix. And just frequently asked questions, just briefly, about MBTA communities. Folks wondered what the compliance criteria were. And basically, there are 3 main ones that we needed to meet. We needed to have a certain developable station area, and 50% of it had to be within one of the 3 MBTA stations, and then the capacity had to be 6,135. We met 2 of the 3 criteria, but did not meet the capacity requirement as I outlined before. I won't belabor the point. But that 6,135 units, that was calculated by taking 25% of our total housing stock. So it's just a state figure. That's folks have asked how they arrived at that number. That's basically how they did it. And folks have asked if Suffolk Downs made us MBTA communities compliant, but unfortunately it didn't, although we tried to advocate so with the state. It was technically a special permit development, not by right, so it didn't qualify under that criteria. A lot of folks also mentioned about properties along the beach. A good chunk of the properties along the beach and the zoning we have along the beach did make us compliant, or at least got us closer to compliance. But the properties you see here that are grayed out, which is roughly from Revere Street up to Point of Pines, all of those properties in the RC2 districts here and here could not be included in our calculation because they're considered environmentally constrained land. Basically, any approvals, even if we easily allow approvals for housing projects, they then need to go through a rigorous state approval process through MEPA. And as a result of that, the state did not include that in the calculation. And then here are the full listing of all the districts that are included in our 4,000 unit calculation today. Before we add on the Shirley Avenue district and hopefully the Green Street district, here are the ones that got us to 4,000 units, which is, all of our GB districts, our RC district up on Squire Road, and then our RC2 districts and the Wonderland Transit Overlay District. So those helped us to get to 4,000. Hopefully the 2 districts we approve will get us to 6,135. And folks asked about alternatives, other ways we could come compliant. The easiest one is to basically upzone all of the existing districts. But we didn't want to go that route for all the reasons I stated before. We wanted to put smart growth in the right locations as opposed to just across the board increasing our zoning. We could adjust the 2 districts, Shirley Avenue and Green Street, making changes at the margins, similar to what, Councilor Novoselsky had suggested, removing a few parcels. That will still keep us compliant. And then the third alternative is to add new multifamily districts in areas that aren't currently zoned for it. Caddy Farms, Beachmont Square, Squire Road, above and beyond the existing RC district there. Those are really the only other ways we could come compliant. So ultimately, we chose 2 districts where we thought a lot of development was happening, where affordable development might be appropriate, and where smart growth is appropriate, and that was how we came to the conclusion. And then folks asked if this is an affordability mandate. Again, it's more carrot than stick. It's an option, not a requirement. If developers without affordability want to utilize the underlying zoning to build other housing or to seek a variance, they can still do both of those things. This is just an option to bypass one of those 2 processes. And if there's no council or ZBA approval who reviews these projects, primarily it would be the Site Plan Review Committee, who I think you all are well accustomed to, but it includes all the professionals at City Hall that review these types of projects on a daily basis. And at that, I will stop and take any questions you might have.
Question, you said the 237 units proposed.
Mm-hmm.
So
Turn your mic on. Mike? Yeah.
he's proposing the 237 units, but that's not the 40R.
Correct. He would be utilizing the underlying zoning to propose a planned unit development through the city council.
Okay, so that means that there will be no affordable housing.
If the city council approves that special permit, yes.
Okay. So the only way that you do get affordable housing if you go 40R.
Or if the city council theoretically could attach a requirement through the special permit conditions, that's always an alternative as well.
And could he appeal the parking? Because it is close to the T.
And yeah, that's, so part of a planned unit development is, they're proposing 0.75 spots, and it's up to the city council's discretion to decide if they want to grant that, based off of the conditions like being closer to the T.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Do you have a printed copy of this presentation? I could not see any of it from the TV.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I don't have a printed copy, but I could certainly, you want me to go run to a printer?
I mean, are we expected to vote on this today?
Yes. So in terms of next steps, the final zoning subcommittee meeting and vote would take place on December 4th. And hopefully you did receive the documents via email, but you could also just take a look on my computer if you want to take a closer look at this. I'd be happy to do that. I'm sorry that you couldn't see from where
I did email the presentation to the planning board members, so I should have the same thing presented tonight.
I'm going to disconnect this, and I could just hand you my computer if you want to look closer.
Okay. I'll take a look at my email. Thanks.
Yeah, are there other proponents to speak tonight? Are there any opponents? Okay. Do you want to give Juan a moment to read it over?
Hearing no opponents, we close the hearing. Want a special meeting of the planning board. First order of business is the approval of previous meeting minutes. Oh, yeah. The first order of business is approval of previous meeting minutes.
So So moved.
Motion approved, second. All in favor? So
Aye.
ordered. Next order of business is a vote on a recommendation to the city council with respect to the creation of the smart growth overlay districts presented this evening within the Shirley Avenue area and Green Street area, which is at the location of the former Lee Trailer Park.
Do you have a question? No. Do you want to give Juan a moment? He's. Yeah. Let's give this a, what, 2-minute recess?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay.
Do you have questions? Sure. Ready for a vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor to issue a favorable recommendation to the city council regarding the creation of these two smart growth overlay districts.
Yes.
Motion by Mr. Delvecchio. Second. Mr. Amico. Motion on the floor is to favorably recommend the adoption of two smart growth 40-yard districts, one for Shirley Avenue, one for Lee Trailer Park. On the motion, I'll take a roll call. Mr. Amico? Mr. Delvecchio? Yes. Yes. Mr. DeSimone? Mr. Jaramillo?
Yes.
Yes. Mrs. Simmons Hurling?
Yes.
Yes. Voted so ordered. The city council will receive a recommendation from the planning board. There is no other business before the board this evening, so can I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn. Meeting adjourned.